Hi guys, Dean McHenry here from Sentient Archery, and this is the first video of hopefully at least 52 videos for 2022. So as I said in my intro, what I'm wanting to start with is equipment and an equipment guide. And so I thought I want to try and do it in a logical sequence, something that makes sense and sort of can follow on one week after the other. So what I've decided to start with is basically to answer the question, what archery equipment do you need? So this video is going to kind of serve a few purposes. So I've written down some notes, so I'm going to sort of check and make sure that I get through all of that. But effectively, the first thing is to sort of draw a picture of what modern recurve archery equipment actually is, all the different items that are included in an archery kit, and then it will also then serve as a purpose of actually going through the terminology, that basically all the different items and their names, and kind of like I said, how those all fit into the big picture. Another purpose is also to give you guys a little bit of insight into my personal archery equipment. So I thought what better way to actually do this than to literally lay out all of my archery equipment and go through it in a pretty logical sequential order, showing you my personal equipment, what I have in my bow bag. And yeah, so basically this is going to help for people that are thinking about buying equipment or just trying to get an understanding of what we mean by modern recurve equipment. And what I've also done is I've created a resource that's going to couple with this. So I've created a Google spreadsheet. I actually made this quite a long time ago, but we're going to keep updating it. So it's a live Google spreadsheet that has a very extensive list of all the possible items that you would need for your archery career. So it is a very extensive list. I'm not going to go through all of the items on that list today. I'm going to just go through the more basic stuff, the more important, more essential things, and then maybe in another video I will go into more depth of sort of your accessories that you might need in a workshop if you're planning on actually working on your equipment. That really should be a standalone video. Okay, so I'm just going to get going with it. I've kind of separated into a few different categories. The first being absolutely essential. Then the next category would be nearly essential items, stuff that you really could get away with, but you probably should just have. Then the accessories that are specific to the different bow styles. So I will also do another video that goes into a lot more detail as to what those bow styles are and how they differ as far as equipment is concerned. Then another category is just really handy accessories, so stuff you really don't need, but it's stuff that I have, stuff that I carry with me because it just makes my life a lot easier and more comfortable, and it definitely helps my overall performance. And then I've got a little small category of exercise items that I highly recommend for all archers to eventually have in their kit. Okay, so I'm going to try and do this, like I said, as logically as I can, and I've got all of the items kind of ready to go in item piece by piece format, and I'm just going to kind of go through it, talk about it, piece it all together, so you can really kind of get a good feel of what I'm talking about and what all of this actually is. Okay, so first things first, I always use a bicycle frame as an analogy to describe this item. This is what we call a riser, okay? Otherwise known as a handle, depends on who you're dealing with, but basically a riser or a handle. So the riser is the base of the frame. It's a very rigid item, and basically that's where you're going to be holding onto the bow, and everything else then bolts onto this item. Okay, so while this looks quite cool, you can't really do a whole hell of a lot with just a riser. So you're obviously going to need limbs that go into that. So basically limbs are the items that go either side of the riser. These are flexible, and this is actually where you get your power from. So these obviously flex back and return to shape, and that's the effective flexibility portion of the bow. So the limbs just pop into the riser. You do have a top limb and a bottom limb, so you always check on the limb, it'll say bottom or top. There we go. These ones are just nice, simple click in limbs, and then of course you're going to put the top one in. So now that you can see, it's starting to look a lot more like an actual bow, but again, you can't do anything with this just yet. you actually have to have a string on this bow. So that's what I'm going to show you next. So basically, well, this is going to be challenging. Let's put that down over here. We always sell our strings in a little like sleeve. It's worth having something like that just to protect them. You can also use a plastic tube or an envelope or something just to protect the string. So you are going to need one of those. And then the string just folds out. And the string should be made specifically for your bow. You do get stock strings, but they're not usually ideal. All bows are a little bit different, so it's good to have your own custom string. String just going to pop onto the limbs. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the process of this because I will do another video explaining how to brace your bow. But obviously now we've got the string on, but it's not attached on the end of the bow, so we can't shoot with this yet. We need to do what we call bracing the bow. So to brace the bow, you need kind of your next item. Again, this is not an absolutely essential item because there are ways to do it without a bow stringer, but we highly recommend that you use a bow stringer. So again, I'm not going to go into detail about this because I don't want to kind of go off on a tangent, but basically the bow stringer is just going to pop on over there, and it then pops on the other end and allows me to then quickly brace the bow. So I'm going to do that. You might not be able to see this because I'm going to get it out of frame, but basically it allows me to just quickly brace the bow. Okay, so we can now pop that off. Obviously we'll need that again to take the string off and unbrace the bow. But there we go. Now you have a full bow and almost ready to actually shoot with it. So fundamentally there's two more items that we need on a modern recurve bow before it's actually shootable. So the first thing is, I'm going to come bring this up a little bit closer. The first thing that you need is an arrow rest. So this one's pre-installed on my bow obviously, but it's not something that is usually included with a bow. It is a separate item, so you need another arrow rest. Okay, so the arrow rest is literally something for the arrow to rest on and hold it into position. So you do get different ones. I'll show you quickly. You can get a very rudimentary plastic arrow rest. These are actually very effective still and a lot cheaper, so we often actually get guys to start off with those. And then the next item, again, you could technically shoot with the bow like this, and our club bows are set up like this, but the next item that is very crucial is what we call a pressure button. So again, I'll show you, try and get a nice close-up of what a pressure button looks like. So that over there is a pressure button. So a pressure button is a interesting little device that basically screws into the side of the riser over here, goes all the way through, and it protrudes through the arrow rest. And what happens is those two then work together to hold the arrow in position. Without going into too much detail, the pressure button is a tuning device. What it does is it allows us to set the position of the arrow, so is it pointing left or right or centered, and it also has a movable button that actually is resistance set, and that helps us make sure that the arrow gets out of the bow straight when you release. Okay, so again, not going to go into too much detail, but effectively that is now 4-5 items before you actually even have a bow. Now, this bow is technically shootable. You don't need anything else with it. Obviously though, you need to shoot something. So I'm going to move on to the arrows. Okay. All right. So arrows as well are also in component form. So I've just got 6 arrows over here, but usually they're in a set of 12. The components are points that are insert points. You glue them in. You then have the shafts, and then you have fletchers that are glued or stuck onto the shafts, and then at the back of the arrow you have little plastic inserts that are called nocks. Those clip directly onto the string, and obviously the fletchers, otherwise known as vanes, just help the arrow stabilize in flight. So that is a full arrow, and again it's in component form. You need 4 different things to set these up. Okay, so now you have an arrow, you could load that in the bow. You can now technically shoot. So now you, in the simplest form, actually shooting arrows, but of course the best thing to do is to shoot at something that's going to safely catch those arrows, and so for that you need what we call a target buttress. Now, target buttress is quite big, so I don't have it inside here with me. I'll quickly put up a frame or a picture of a target buttress. That is actually not the target. That is something that you put a target onto that then will effectively stop the arrows safely without damaging them. Okay, so there you've got your arrows. Then you will put what we call a target or a target face onto that buttress. Okay, so this is just a 40 centimeter small field face, but you get them in different sizes. You obviously, the whole objective of this sport is to shoot arrows as close to the center of a target as you can, so you're definitely going to need some targets of some kind of size. Okay, so that is very close to what you need as far as the most essential items to actually participate in the sport. Obviously, there are a couple of smaller little items. I'm going to just quickly show you in component form that you get points that come individual components like that. Then you're obviously also going to get your nocks. These are just also insert nocks, so you get those usually in sets of 12. And then your fletchers are also individual items. So when we kind of buy a kit, often that kit ends up being 15, 20, 25 different items that come together to form a kit. Okay, all right, then something that I always keep in my quiver or in my bag is just some accessories, and that would be spares of arrow rests, or actually even just the spare pins. Sometimes they break on the arrow rest, and so you need to be able to replace those. So I keep a little Ziploc with a couple of extra pieces of tape, pins, actual arrow rests themselves. That is on the resource list as well, and so it's not essential, but something that is worth having is having access to spares. Okay, all right, so then moving on to sort of, like I said, the nearly essential items. So yes, technically you've got a bow, you've got arrows, you have a target, you can shoot. Now there are a few things. One thing is that you've now spent probably some decent money on a bow, and so you don't really want to be putting this bow on the ground or leaning it up against the wall. You're going to damage it. So the next item that, like I say, is nearly essential is a bow stand. So a bow stand is a fairly simple device that basically they almost all have the same design. They're usually a tripod type setup like this. So this one's a nice, strong, sturdy one that you can just lock up like that. And so effectively what happens is that the bow rests in there, the string is going to go into this, what we call a string pinch, and then the bow holds in position on the ground. So I'm just going to quickly show you what that looks like. So you pop this on the ground, and then your bow can now stand like that. Okay, so now it stays off the ground, it's not going to fall over easily, and it's just going to protect it. Okay, so I can pop that down now. So, bow stand. The next thing is that you've got your very expensive arrows, and now you need to put them somewhere. You're not going to put them on the ground. You don't really want to have to like stuff them in your pockets. It just doesn't work. So you need something else. And so that item is called a quiver. So a quiver is basically just like a little bag pocket that is going to clip on your waist. So you always usually have a belt included with a quiver. And then, hope you can see this properly, your arrows just go into the quiver so that you have quick access to them when you're shooting. You can then obviously pick up the bow, load your arrows in, and obviously when you collect, you can just pop the arrows back in the quiver. Okay, so this is a field quiver, so it kind of, the arrows point backwards. You get different styles, but effectively that's what a quiver is, and it's, like I said, nearly an essential item. Okay, so it's worth noting at this point that this is obviously quite high performance modern recurve equipment, but if you're just getting going, you can do this with a simpler bow. So I've just got an example of a very basic sort of training bow, but the items remain the same. You still need a riser, you still need limbs, you still need a string, you still need an arrow rest. Ideally, if it's your own bow, you also need your own pressure button, and of course then you need a quiver, you need a bow stand. At most of our clubs, our bow stands incorporate a stand for arrows, so you don't necessarily need a standalone quiver, but if you don't have a bow stand like that, obviously a quiver is pretty important. Okay, so another item, or other items that are worth mentioning again at this point as well, is some bows come with them, but you can also buy them separate as accessories, and that is cases or sleeves for your riser and your limbs and your stabilizers. So these are just the sleeves that came with my limbs. These obviously just keep your very expensive stuff in good condition. It protects them when they're in the bag and when you're transporting the stuff around. So it's just worth knowing that it's a good thing to have. Some equipment, like I say, comes with it. Sometimes you have to buy it separately. As long as you put it in a good case or a good bow bag, you don't really need to worry too much. Okay, so that takes me through all of the essential stuff, and now I'm going to kind of go on to the almost essential stuff. Okay, so the next thing, like I said, if you want to keep your stuff in good condition, especially if you're transporting it around, you need something to put all of your equipment in. So basically, I'm using a Recurve backpack at the moment. We highly recommend these, and we sell more of these than anything else. And basically what this is going to be a very simple, easy carry bag. It has shoulder straps, so you can put it on and you can jump in the car, or you can get on a bike even, or just walking to the range. And what that then has is it's got an arrow tube, which is something that you can also get separate, but this one's incorporated. Arrow tube allows you to put your arrows and your stabilizer, your long rod stabilizer inside there and keep it nice and protected. And then it incorporates small little pockets, and internally it's got another little case or a little bag that you can keep your riser and your limbs separate from everything else. And then it's got a big cavity inside that you can just pop all kinds of stuff, your quivers, bow stand, everything just goes in there. Obviously, what bow bag you need is going to be very much dependent on how much equipment you have, how many accessories you have, and so on. Okay, but basically, nearly essential item. All right, then going on to your actual shooting gear. So again, this stuff is nearly essential, and the first thing you're gonna want to get there is what we call an arm guard. In fact, an arm guard is probably the first item you'll ever acquire. So quickly, arm guard is just a plastic or a canvas or leather guard that sits on your bow arm, sits on your forearm over here, and that just protects your arm from the string. It's what we call string buzz, when the string makes contact on the arm. Simple accessory, gotta have, worth having a spare as well. Then the next thing that is almost essential is what we call a finger tab. So I'll try and get a little bit closer for you. A finger tab is a fairly simple item that goes onto your hand on the draw side, and this is like a usually leather guard that just protects your fingers from the string when you're shooting. Now this isn't absolutely essential when you're shooting very low poundage. You can shoot just bare fingers. The other option as well is to actually use tape, to just tape your fingers if you find that the bare fingers is a little bit too tender. But eventually you must shoot with a finger tab. It is by far the most effective way to release a string and make sure that your fingers don't get damaged after hundreds and hundreds of arrows. Okay, then another item on the list is probably the cheapest piece of archery equipment you will ever have to purchase, and this is what we call a finger sling. A finger sling is an interesting little device. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how it works, again for another video, but basically a finger sling is something that pops onto your index finger, goes around and onto your thumb, and what it does is it just actually catches your bow when you're shooting so that you don't have to hold it and grip it too tight. There's a whole methodology and philosophy behind shooting with finger slings, and I'll get into that in another video. But that is just another item that forms part of your kit. You also would ideally want to keep spares of that because they are very easily and often lost. Okay, then going on to some other items that are kind of not super important, not absolutely essential, but really handy. So the first thing in that is what we call an arrow puller. Now, I use an arrow puller that has a little magnetic clip, so I'm just going to kind of talk about those things together. If you take a look at my quiver here, let's pop this on quickly. What I've got is I've got a little magnetic clip here that allows me to just pop that on and quickly take it off. Now, what an arrow puller is pretty much in the name. When you have shot your arrow into a target, it can be quite hard to get out. Arrow puller just goes over the arrow and gives you extra grip so that you can pull that arrow out of the target. Okay, very handy to have, but not essential. And these little magnetic clips are really cool because you can just keep it handy, nice and easy. Okay, so that's your arrow puller. Okay, another item that we almost always recommend when we're telling people to buy equipment is what we call a bow square. So a bow square is effectively a glorified ruler, and what we use this for is taking measurements on the bow. Every time you set up a bow, you are going to want to check things such as your bracing height, so it's checking that measurement, making sure it's the same. You can also clip this on the string just to quickly check where your knocking point height is. The knocking point height is the position of where the arrow sits on the string. You can also use it for taking measurements of your tiller. So there, yeah, quite a lot of useful things. Like I said, a glorified ruler, but super, super handy for precision shooting. Okay, then something else that I keep in my quiver is some tools. So I've just got a nice little multi-tool, a Leatherman over here, and then I've got a metric and imperial set of Allen keys. With these bows, there's lots of little bits and pieces, screws and nuts and bolts that can come loose very easily or need to be adjusted on the go. Having these is almost essential in your quiver, especially if you're competing, but of course most clubs and workshops will have this kind of stuff for you, but definitely worth considering and kind of getting at some point in your shooting career. Let me just take these accessories off here so that I can free up my hands. I think it is also worth noting that there are different types of finger tabs. So you'll see on that spreadsheet that I've created, that I will put in the links in the notes below. You get different kinds of finger tabs. You can get a very basic sort of club style finger tab, very rudimentary, and then you also get an Olympic style, which has got a split in the leather, and then also has a what we call a finger spacer that basically just parts your fingers. This is for shooting with one finger above, two fingers below the arrow. So it's just worth considering that your finger tabs are not generic. You can't use one finger tab for all shooting styles. Okay, then another item that maybe even forms part of sort of a more workshop list, but we always ask the guys to keep some of this. This is just string wax. It basically works but like a lipstick or a lip ice, and you just basically put that onto your string, rub it into the fibers, and it just helps prolong the life of your string and keeps sun, water, dust out of the fibers in your string. So definitely worth having as well. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to the really sort of almost luxury items, stuff that you don't need, not even nearly essential, really just luxury, nice to have items, and then I'm going to swing back to the accessories on the bow. So quickly, what I have and what I keep in my kit, I have a very small little A5 clipboard. When you shoot competitions, it's not you don't always have clipboards handy at competitions, so this is just really nice to have. Make sure you've got something firm to put your score sheet on and make sure you can do your scoring nice and neatly. So that's always awesome. Next thing is a little sweat towel. So this just clips on my quiver, and a sweat towel basically, obviously, like I said, for sweat, for your hands. If it's very hot, you know, obviously you're gonna sweat. So nice to have, but this also serves a second purpose, and that is that when you shoot your arrows into a target buttress, they're often made of a sort of high density compound of foam or rubber, and that often leaves residue on your arrows. A little towel like this, quickly rub that off. It's very effective, and it's just again another really nice thing to have in your kit. Okay, then something else that is actually used more by compound archers is what we call a release pouch. So compounders use a release, they just pop it in there and they take it out, but I keep one of these on my hips as well, and that's basically just for accessories. You can put a drink in here, you can put snacks in there, you can put extra tools, anything you feel like you want to have right quick access to on your hip while you're shooting. So very nice thing to have as well. Then something that at some point in time is worth at least experimenting with, and that is what we call grip tape. So this is just tennis racket handle grip tape, and what we use is we actually wrap up the handle on your riser with this. And the reason for that is that the surface of the handle is not always nice and rough and sticky, so often it can be smooth, and especially if your hands, you've got a bit of sun cream or you're sweating or something like that, your hand can move around on that. The grip tape just gives you this nice sort of sticky, rubbery, soft sort of layer to make sure that your hand position stays consistent when you're shooting. So worth having as an accessory, and maybe also worth having spares in case your one that you have on your bow unravels. Okay. Alright, then next thing on the list is binoculars or a spotting scope, depending on what you're doing, especially as you start to shoot longer distances. It's very important to be able to spot your own arrows, see where they are, so that you know how to adjust in terms of your sight or your aiming position. Different formats like Field and 3D, small little pair of binoculars that you can just swing over your shoulder is worth having. If you're shooting world archery where you can have your own space that you're going to shoot from the same place every single time, then having a tripod with a spotting scope is the optimum solution for that. But yeah, it just depends on your eyesight for a start, and it depends on the application. But I just use a small little pair of not even very expensive binoculars, because they do get kind of damaged and dirty out on the course, so definitely worth having as well. Not necessary for indoor shooting unless your eyesight is really, really bad, but more for your longer distances. Okay, then some other stuff that I did put on that list. There was a small little category there for exercise stuff. So just 3 items that I keep handy in my bow bag. The first is what we call TheraBand, or exercise elastic. This is great for doing actual archery specific exercises, and it's also really good for warming up. So you can do shot simulations with these, you can warm up the shoulders, and again, like I said, you can actually focus on very specific archery specific muscles and exercises. So all of our intermediate and advanced guys have to have a TheraBand elastic. Okay, I've actually done a video and a few videos of these exercises that you can do, so you can find them in the YouTube channel. I also have a video, maybe I'll pop it in the notes here or in a card somewhere, just explaining what a TheraBand is and kind of why it's useful for archery. Then the next item on the list, we'll definitely do a video about this on its own at some point. This is what we call a shot trainer, and basically a shot trainer is just a device that goes on your arm. You can then actually clip onto the string, and when you shoot, it wants to pull the arm forward. It teaches you to get really good follow through and what we call good back tension and expansion. So yeah, I'll definitely go into more detail, but worth noting that this is something that almost all, at least intermediate and advanced archers, must have in their archery kit. Okay, then the last item is, not sure what you'd even call this. I don't think it has a specific name. I'm just going to call it like a bicep training tool, and what this does is it actually sits inside your elbow, and what it does is when you're shooting, you squeeze your bicep and you squeeze your forearm against your bicep, and you feel this little pipe sitting in the elbow. And again, it is to train good follow through and to train good expansion and the right use of muscles when releasing and drawing the bow. Again, I'll do an entire video on this at some stage, but just something that I keep in my kit. Okay, lots of talking, lots of information. I hope you're getting an idea of like what a modern archery kit has and involves, and of course seeing my stuff, and I've been competing at a very high level for a very long time, so I think it's useful to see what I keep, what I don't have, what I don't worry about. So yeah, I hope this is useful so far. I'm gonna then now quickly go through shooting style specific accessories. I will then do another video entirely on the shooting styles and the differences in accessories as far as equipment is concerned for those shooting styles, but basically so you can see again big picture of how the bow kind of goes together. I'm going to go through that. So right now we've got a fairly bare recurve bow, no accessories. So the one accessory that goes onto this bow that is used in freestyle recurve is a sight. I have the sight block already installed on the riser. This does not come with your bow, this will come with your sight. The sight then basically goes onto that, slides into position, you secure this little nut down or bolt down, and that secures the sight into position. Now what a sight is actually an aiming methodology only used in Olympic or freestyle recurve, and this just basically allows us to adjust the position up and down, left or right, and you have a little sight pin over here. You can get spares of these and they are interchangeable to different styles. So that is a sight, and probably the most accurate way to shoot a bow, but only allowed, permitted in like I said, Olympic and freestyle recurve. Okay, then with those styles you can use full stabilization. So with Olympic recurve you can use full stabilizers. So that is what a long rod stabilizer looks like. This is called a long rod. This little black goodie over here is called a dampener. It's a sort of stiff rubber piece that fits between the stabilizer and the end weight, and that just takes out vibration in the bow. So that's called a dampener. So stabilizer. Then you get different types of stabilizers. So taking the stabilizer off, and let's quickly pop the sight off as well. You can get the most simple form of stabilization is what we call a barebow weight. This is used for some of the shooting styles. Usually just one very heavy piece of weight that goes down underneath the handle. You can also put stabilization. There are often extra thread inserts in risers above and below the handle, so you can play around with your stabilization. Again, for another video. I've got these in different sizes, so I have a nice small 190 gram, a 250 gram, and then a bigger 350 gram barebow weight. Then with Bowhunter Recurve you have another stabilization option, and that is using what we call a Bowhunter Stabilizer, and that is just a 12-inch stabilizer that does effectively the same thing as the long rod. It's just not allowed to be longer than 12 inches, so that just goes in the bow like that. Okay, so one other thing that I don't have with me, unfortunately, I've lent them out, is what we call a Vbar set. Now I'll put a picture in, I think, just so that you can see what I'm talking about. Basically a Vbar set goes in between the bow and your long rod stabilizer, so it works with a long rod stabilizer. You would always start with simpler, just a long rod for freestyle and Olympic recurve, and then you would add in your V-bars after that. V-bars basically have an extender, a V-bar unit that then attaches your two side rods that come either side of the bow, and that becomes a full stabilization system, and that then helps you balance and stabilize the bow in multiple planes. Okay, so this is very much modern equipment. It is a lot of items. You can then, even with your stabilization, you can have extra weights that you put on the side rods and on the long rod to play with your balancing. So that is also in the list of all the possible accessories and items. Stabilizers don't always come with weights and dampeners, so you sometimes need to buy that separately, especially spare weights for your stabilizers. Okay, then the last piece that I have here that I want to show you is what we call a clicker. Now, a clicker is probably the last item that you would acquire in this process, and again, it is only for your freestyle and Olympic recurve guys, and that is a very simple device that attaches on the bow. I'm going to just try and insert this, and then I'll get it nice and close so you can see. Right. So I'm not going to fully install this, but basically what a clicker is in the simplest terms, you get different styles, but this is what we call a paddle clicker. And a paddle clicker is just a device that the arrow then goes behind. You're going to set the arrow in behind. You then draw it back, and it then, as you get to full draw position, is going to actually click against there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to insert this all the way so I can actually show you exactly how that works. So behind there on the arrow rest like so we can actually get a kind of a little bit of a close-up view of how this all works. You would get to a full draw position, draw back, and on the click you then release. So it's otherwise called a draw check. Make sure that you're drawing always to the same point. So that is a clicker. You do get different types, and it depends on a few factors, but effectively that is sort of the last piece of the puzzle with Olympic recurve. Okay, I'm kind of going off a little bit on a tangent here with the equipment. So much to talk about, so much to get into, but I think I've achieved what I wanted to do with this video, to give you that complete view of all the possible little items that can go into a kit. I think the only thing that I haven't gone into and will go into in another video is things like workshop-based stuff. That would be fletching jigs and arrow saws and gas torches and other little tools. Is in that list, in that resource, will continue to grow, but yeah, like I said, for another video. It is also worth if you have lots of items as you collect, to have a little toolbox or a little tackle box that then goes with your bow bag, just to keep all of these little accessories and spares. So I actually have an example of that. So I've got some bits and pieces, fletchers and so on, that I just keep in this box that then goes with me when I go to competitions or go training. Okay guys, thank you so much for, if you've gotten to this point, listening to everything that I had to say. Please subscribe, share this with somebody that you think might be useful. If you have any questions about everything that I just took you through, please obviously let me know, drop them in the comments, send me an email, send me a message or WhatsApp, whatever. Just ask the questions. I'm obviously happy to help answer any of that and clarify anything that didn't make sense. And then if you again have any suggestions for video lessons for me, let me know. I'll put it into the list and hopefully I can get to it soon. Cool, thank you so much guys, and we'll chat next week.